Buongiorno. Good morning. How are you? Kalimera. I'm Gary Alex. I have a home-based recording studio. I go by GaryAlexAudio.com. And today I decided to put together a video to accomplish a couple of things. First, I wanted to go through my process of how I like to record live drums, bass guitar, and electric guitars. I go through my mic selection, placement, and general guidelines that I like to follow when I'm tracking. I do call it a quick and dirty recording because I just bang it out real quick. I don't do more than one or two takes usually. And it's a lot of fun to work that way sometimes. So that's what this video is going to showcase. The other reason I did it was because I wanted to find out if using a Neve 1073 and an API preamp in a home-based studio is really going to make a difference sonically and help the recordings stand apart from just sort of a home-based recording. So here we go. I'm going to get things going with the drums, go through the bass, go through the guitar, kind of wrap things up with my mix template, and then at the very end of the video, you'll see the final mix, or you'll get to hear the final mix. Enjoy. All right. So we're going to try to record some drums with a basic setup. Right now I've got a Beyerdynamic M201 on the snare drum. It's mounted on there with that clip. And it's about 4 fingers up. It's a little higher than I normally go. It's pointed right at the center of the snare. Inside the kick drum, we're going with the Beta 52A. There is a little pillow in there. I don't usually use it, but we're trying it out today to kind of get a tighter sound. It's about halfway in the bass drum, pointed just offset of where the beater's going to hit. We got some SM81 spaced pair. Measured them out from the center of the snare, 40.5 inches up. Trying to get the edges of the cymbals not directly at the bell. Also, we got a mono overall drum kit mic. It's about 3 feet away in front of the bass drum, pointing at the center of the kit, and it's about, the height of it is about just over the kick drum to where the bottom of the toms are. It's an Apex ribbon microphone. It was modified by Michael Jolly back when he was doing mic modifications. And unfortunately, he's not doing that anymore. And then I just tried to deaden the room a little bit. Threw up some producer blankets, and I built some bass traps. Got them against the wall there. And that's pretty much it. We're running the kick drum into the Chameleon Labs 7602. It's the MK2, and it was modified by Zen Pro Audio. Sounds really nice. Snare drum is going through the AMS Neve 1073, which I'm super pumped about. Overheads are going through the API A2d, and the mono room mic is going through the Warm Audio WA273. And all of those preamps are connected through the analog ins on the RME Fireface UFX, and it's going directly into Pro Tools. All right, so we got a little session set up. We're using the first 5 analog inputs on the RME Fireface, going right into Pro Tools. We're tracking with a little bit of EQ. Not much, but just a touch. We're taking out 50 hertz on the kick drum, boosting at 60, taking a little out at 360, and there's a little shelf at 4.9, and that's on the kick drum. The room mic is going through the Warm Audio WA273, and we're taking out 80 hertz and below, and we got the tone button pressed in. We got the snare drum going through the Neve 1073. We're doing the same thing, a little bit of EQ. We're rolling off at 80, boosting a touch at 220, and a little boost at 7.2 and a touch on the high shelf. On the overheads, we got the API, just the phantom power on, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, the API is really hot, so there's just a tiny bit of gain going on with that. And we're going analog on the API. We're not using the analog to digital converter in that. And that's the setup for now. All right, so now we got some basic levels, and we're going to try to record a pass to see how everything sounds together. I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not a drummer, so keep that in mind. So we got some decent levels. Our waveforms look great. We got kick drum, snare drum, the overheads, and the room mic. Nothing's clipping on the preamps or in Pro Tools. We're definitely getting a little bit of coloration from the preamps, but I'm not pushing them into the red, so we're not getting too much distortion at all. So everything's sounding pretty good. So let's give this a shot for real. So one of the things that you learn when you record in your home studio and you don't have separate rooms to track drums or other instruments, you're all in the same room. So obviously, or if you're working by yourself, then there's a lot of trial and error. So I just listened to what we recorded on that little test run, and I noticed that the snare drum basically sounded like crap. So I'm going to move the microphone a little bit closer to the snare drum, see if I can get more of a direct thwacking crack sound. But the kick drum sounded great. The overheads in the room were good. So we're going to go with that. We're just going to move the snare drum mic. And I did adjust the level on the kick drum mic. I turned it down a little bit just because it was a little hot. So other than that, we'll give that a shot. So we ended up moving the snare drum mic 2 fingers over the snare drum, right over the rim, pointing at the center. Pretty sure that's going to make a huge impact on the sound of the drum overall. I also want to mention that these are new heads on the snare and kick drum, and I spent a pretty good amount of time tuning them beforehand. That's probably the most important aspect of getting good live drum sounds, is new heads and proper tuning. All right, so a few passes later, I've decided that I have to make a couple of final tweaks. I ended up giving a little extra shelf on the high end on the snare drum, on the Neve, and I changed the high mids to 3.2 instead of 7.2. I think that's going to make a difference on the crispness and make the snare drum a little bit more present in the overall mix. Okay, so the drums have been recorded. I would say the performance was average, not great, because like I said, I'm not a drummer, but I'm going to break out Beat Detective and line up some kick and snare hits, make sure everything's nice and tight, and move on to bass guitar from there. So the magic of Beat Detective in Pro Tools has taken place. My kick and snare hits are lined up. Toms sound good. Worked out great. So maybe at some point I'll put together a tutorial on how I use Beat Detective, but for now we got kick, snare, overheads, and room mic all lined up, nice and tight, consolidated, and it's good to go. So I'm pretty happy with the raw drum sounds. Everything sounds pretty good right now. Time to move on to bass guitar and then a couple of guitar tracks. We'll give it a quick mix at the end. This again is a quick and dirty tutorial on my process of recording in my home studio. So for the bass guitar track, I'm using my piece of shit bass. That's what it's called. It's nothing great, but it's all I have, so I'm using it. I made sure I got decent strings on it, and I'm plugging it directly into the Neve. I did use a little bit of EQ while I was tracking. I rolled off the high end, and I gave it a little boost at 220 and a little boost at 1.5. I'm also taking out the lows below 80. So usually when I do track bass for real, I will use my Sans amp pedal. It's this gorgeous little thing up here somewhere. Where is it? Ah, there it is. So yeah, the Sans amp is great. I can get really good hard rock metal tones out of it. But the really cool thing is that you can split the signal, so you can get a signal out to your amp and then mic that up, and then you can also run a direct, so you get 3 tracks simultaneously, and then you can get a little flexibility with your tone. And if you want to use an amp sim, you get the clean DI signal. Most of the time I do end up just using the Sans amp tone as the primary and blend in the other sounds from there. So let's do it. All right, so I tracked the bass guitar direct through the Neve, like I said, and it sounds pretty good, just on its own. So as you can tell, I'm going for a Tool-esque type sound. I'm maybe stealing their riff a little bit just for the example here. But it's out of total respect, and we're going to move on to guitars now. On to guitar tracks now. Ended up recording 2 guitar tracks, 1 pan left, 1 pan right, which is common. I ended up using my PV Vandenberg, my metal shred guitar. Got a modified humbucker in there. I think it's a Les Paul humbucker. Went into the Black Star direct, no pedals or anything. I used the dirty channel, mic'd it up with an SM57. Got it close to the grill. I put it about 2 fingers away, and I have it just to the edge of the cone. I feel like I'm able to get the best tone that way, as far as a nice blend between low end and mid-range and clarity. I tracked that real quick. Everything was done in 1 take because this is quick and dirty, but it sounds pretty good. Let's check it out. So these guitar tracks came out great in 1 take. We got 57 guitar left, 57 guitar right, and man, they sound pretty good coming through that Neve. So yeah, we're going to roll with that. So we've got all our tracks, we got our drums, we got our bass, we got our guitars. Everything's looking good there. I'm doing a quick mix. I use a template. I learned from a couple of people, mostly Jordan Valeriat. He's got a great course, Hardcore Music Studio. I recommend everybody check that out. But I also learned from Andrew Sheps through the Pure Mix tutorials. And of course, Graham Cochran, Recording Revolution. But anyways, make a long story short, I use sort of a template, and I use a lot of the same processing. Run all my drums to my drum bus, and I also send my kick, toms, and snare through the crush bus. I ended up duplicating my room track, and I tried to create a room sound because obviously you can't get a real room sound out of a basement. So I used the Lexicon 480 large wooden room preset, and I kind of messed with that a little bit. I use a couple of different verbs on the snare. I use a snare verb and a gated verb. Guitars are being bussed to a guitar bus, as you can see right there. Bass, I threw on the Dark Glass plugin, which I really like. You get some pretty good metal tones out of that. So drums are auto-aligned. I don't usually use this plugin, but sometimes I do. It does work great most of the time. And so I used it this time. And I started using this Oxford drum gate on kick drum. I haven't been able to get it to work great on snare or anything else, but I do like what it does for my kick. I'm able to crank up my high end, which I do a lot of the times on a kick drum, and the gate kind of doesn't make the bleed sound ridiculous. So yeah, there's a pretty good amount of high end, pretty good cut there in the low mids, but a lot of highs and a little bit of compression on that. I use the lo-fi, acts as a clipper, really makes the kick and snare jump out. Took out a little bit of low mud, and I decided to use some tape, the Slate tape machine. I like it. Snare drum, I did gate it, which I don't usually gate. Didn't use it too heavily, but I did gate it. SSL channel, pretty much on every track. Pretty good amount of high end boosted, 8K, and I think it's around 1.6K. Took out a little honkiness and mud and boosted 220. I definitely use the lo-fi on that as well. Sometimes I use the Black Salt audio clipper, which is a great one as well. Took out some of that honkiness that was popping out, and I decapitated the crap out of it. Gotta add some distortion on drums. This is the reverb that I use a lot of the times on snare drum. It's a preset I created, and then I use the same verb for the gate. It's just a quick gate. Adds a little body. On the overheads, I definitely boosted some high end, around 4.5, 5K, and again around 3. Took out a little bit of mud at 300, and I did a pretty good boost around 110. A little bit of compression there, and also some more honkiness, muddiness with that EQ. Nothing crazy though. That API, man, it just makes everything sound good. On the room, I did boost pretty heavily on the lows and the highs. Wanted to really emphasize that. And slammed it pretty good through the API 2500. And I added some distortion with the decapitator, as usual, because I love distortion on drums and everything, really. The drum crush bus, I used the pumping preset, and I slam it about 8 to 10 dB on the kick, snare, and toms usually. I got it cranked up pretty good in this mix. I don't usually use that much parallel compression, but I did this time. Drums, I use this True Iron by Kazrog. I love this thing. It's a little harmonic plug-in, transformer sound, and it sounds really nice. I use the SSL punch preset on the drums, just like a couple of dB, 1 to 2 dBs, nothing crazy. And sometimes I use this plugin on Drum Bus. I like it. It's the Black Box, and Plugin Alliance did a really nice job with this. Little saturation and high end there. Bass guitar, I just used the Dark Glass plugin. Pretty good amount of distortion. I slam it through this CLA 76. Like, slammed it. Took out the low end, the mud, and I did a couple of boosts on the high end. I want a little bit of more sort of attack on that bass. And imagine that, more distortion with the decapitator. Guitars, I kept them pretty simple. A little boost around 2K. Took out some low mids around 330. Going through the guitar bus, again, I used the Kazrog True Iron and a little bit of Pro Q. Took out some honkiness that I was getting, and then I used this band as a sort of a multi-band to kind of tame the chugs, so it only really hits when the chugs happen. And then lastly, I used the CLA 3A. I really like this on guitar. 3 to 5 dBs of compression on this thing, and it just makes the guitars sit nice in the mix, and it makes them have a really nice tone as well. On my master bus, mix bus, whatever you want to call it, I'm going again with this True Iron Master Bus Sheen preset. I really liked it. Kind of dialed it in to taste a little bit. I use the Slate Digital stuff a lot. I love it. Just trimmed it back a little bit, and then a lot of the times I use the Neve setting on the console there. Sometimes I like to use the Brit 4K, and I use the distressor, and I thought it sounded really good on this mix, just like 1 to 3 dBs on that. And then I also used the G Comp, the Chris Lord Algae Finalizer preset, just touching it. Oxford Inflator is great. Really brings the whole mix forward a little bit. Then another Plugin Alliance plugin, Brainworks. A little bass shift going on there. Nothing crazy. Mostly what I'm using it for is the mono maker. I really like that. And the stereo spread gives me a little width and a touch of high end on the side information there at 8K. And from there, I ended up going with the Slate tape machine again. And then I love this thing. This is the linear phase multiband. It really helps to kind of shape the overall mix. I used the multi-electro mastering preset. I forget who I learned this from, but it was a YouTube video I saw, and I was like, wow, that thing's sweet. So I just touch it with that. Then I used the Slate mastering console thing. I don't remember what this is called, but I don't use the compressor on it. I just use it to kind of clip the whole sort of mix, and I get it cranking up pretty good to -11. And then lastly, I use the Isotope Ozone 9. I like the IRC4 setup with the transient preset or selection, whatever it is. I get it. I don't use it too heavy-handedly, if that's a word, but it definitely helps the mix kind of sit nicely around -7, which is nice and loud. And that's pretty much my setup. So now let's hear it in action.